Hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. Mark Menzies has announced his resignation from the Tory party, saying he won't be standing at the next election. The Fylde MP was suspended following claims he used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off bad people who had locked him in a flat. He disputes the allegations, though. Following an investigation, the Conservative Party says it can't conclude there was a misuse of funds, but said there was a pattern of behaviour that falls below the standards expected of MPs. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, will meet Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley on tomorrow to discuss community relations. It comes as Sir Mark Rowley is facing calls to quit over his handling of pro-Palestinian protests, with the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, suggesting he's emboldened anti-Semites. The campaign against anti-Semitism is also calling for Sir Mark to resign or be sacked after its chief executive was described as openly Jewish by an officer. The Met Police have now responded in a statement saying the Assistant Commissioner, Matt Twist, has written to Gideon Fulter to offer a private meeting to apologise and discuss what the Met can do to ensure Jewish Londoners feel safe. This evening, the Met will also invite senior representatives from across London's Jewish communities, officials from the Mayor's office and members of the House of Lords and selected media to operational planning exercises. A decision by the US to approve £49 billion in aid for Ukraine has been welcomed by the UK, with the Foreign Secretary describing it as a vital step forward. After months of wrangling, American politicians ended a deadlock, agreeing to provide a package which will also help replenish weapons and munitions. President Zelensky says the move will keep the war from expanding and will save thousands of lives. It now heads to the Senate, which is expected to pass the bill in the next few days. And a record 50,000 people ran the London Marathon today. Most have now crossed the finishing line after completing the 26.2-mile route. They started just after 10 a.m, the event raising millions of pounds for charities. Our very own GB News political editor, Chris Hope, was one of the many who crossed the finishing line today.
Well, I've done it. I got round 26.2 miles, 5 hours, 8 minutes, a bit slower than normal for me. Had a very sore left hip at some point. That was really hard, but here's the proof, here's the medal. That's why you do these kind of things. We raised, I think, over £7,000 for Scope. I'll check on it online later. It's a great cause. It's moving, it's exhausting, and it's well worth the effort. And if you're mad like me, why not try and run it?
For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Free Speech Nation.
The Cass Review into paediatric gender care has been one of the most important medical reports in recent years, but not everyone is happy about its findings. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors. We keep up to date with what they're trying to cancel so you don't have to. But coming up on the show tonight, the fallout continues following the landmark Cass Review into the services provided by the NHS to children and young people questioning their gender. We'll be analysing the findings with a series of guests, including the barrister Sarah Phillimore. Bev Jackson from LGB Alliance will be here as well to tell us about whether the practices exposed by the Cass Review amount to an attack on gay rights. I'll also be joined by barrister Robin Moira White for an alternative view and Dr. Carrie Mendoza, who's going to join us from the States to examine the reaction to the Cass Review over there. And of course, myself and my brilliant panel will be answering questions from our rather lovely studio audience. And my comedian guests this evening are Paul Cox and Lewis Schaefer. Run the London Marathon today, Paul?
I was going to, but in the end, just watch it on the telly.
Dressed as a giant bacon wrapper.
Yeah, just as a pig.
As a pig.
No, I just let other people do it.
Yeah.
I find it's much easier to watch it on the telly.
It's easier. I've learned that it's easier to watch sport than to participate.
I occasionally donate,
Do you?
a pound.
Well, that makes you a better person anyway.
It does, obviously.
What about you, Lewis? I can imagine you running the marathon.
I ran 2 marathons. I won this marathon.
Yes.
By not running.
It's the only way you ever would.
No, but you run because when you participate in it, it just creates stress. It's totally bad for your body. It's probably cancer causing.
Oh, for goodness sake.
No, seriously, all stress is bad.
Including exercise.
No, especially exercise.
Well, you heard it here first. Don't exercise. What a great excuse. OK, well, let's go out to our lovely audience. We've got a question from Paul. Where is Paul? Hi.
Hi. For the retraction of the apology for the incident, should the Metropolitan Police boss be forced to resign?
Yeah, so we've all seen the clip, haven't we? I'm sure we've got the clip somewhere, but this is to do with the Met Police boss who's put out this statement about what happened when someone was referred to as being openly Jewish. Can we play the clip? We'll have a look.
You are quite openly Jewish. This is a pro-Palestinian march. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm worried about the reaction to your presence.
So there was an apology, and then there was a subsequent apology for the apology. It got very confusing. Did you have any thoughts on this, Paul?
Well, you and I both work with openly Jewish people on this channel. We know how distressing that can be at times, Andrew. But the problem we've got here is I don't think, actually, he should be sacked. I think the Met Police need to own this now. They've created this two-tier policing system, either inadvertently or quite deliberately. I'll leave that open to debate. However, now they need to own it, and they need to be transparent. I mean, what that police officer there, let's not beat around the bush. It's a difficult job, right the way from top to bottom. And their overlords are very much part of the woke culture war, and very much on that side of things. But at the end of the day, how can you accuse someone being openly Jewish?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, if you substituted that for any other racial group, it wouldn't even be a conversation, would it?
Openly black?
Right. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. It's the use of the language should be a red line anyway. But we've seen this before as well. Whenever there's protests and there's someone there, not even a counter-protest, but someone there who might be attacked, they often move that person away, and it looks like they're blaming that person. It's happened to Billboard Chris, who's been on this show. Yeah. Why are the police sort of dragging people away who aren't the problem? The problem are those who might cause the attack, right?
So, quite interestingly, what they're saying by saying that he is being provocative by being there is that the protest is dangerous in some way, which is what they've denied up until now. Because
that's interesting, yes.
Because it's always been peaceful. And what they're saying is, well, if you're here, it would create... Just one Jewish guy would turn them into this nasty mob.
It does... I understand that the police's job is to keep the peace, and that is difficult. But Jewish people should be able to walk wherever they want in a free society. We saw this in Edinburgh with the guy being asked by the police to hide his Star of David. Yeah. I mean, come on, that's not 2024 Britain, is it?
It is. Unfortunately, what this what this guy did, which is why he should be arrested, is he basically embarrassed the cops for not being able to police the streets.
You want the Jewish man arrested?
Well, if I were the police, I'd want him arrested.
You're such a contrarian.
Yeah.
For goodness sake.
You know what the thing is?
You speaking as an openly Jewish man yourself.
I'm not openly Jewish. I don't wear yarmulke. I'm not like some of those Jews who wear like a Flavor Flav Jewish star on their.
You talk about it all the time.
I do amongst people who are not going to hit me.
Okay. Well, that's basically no one.
I do. And I think I've made a mistake by aligning myself with the Jews. I'm not even Jewish, I'm Italian. And I think I did become Jewish in order to get ahead in the comedy business.
But the point I'm making is serious and true, is it not? That people should be able to walk wherever they want in a free country.
Yes, and this is your problem. is you're always talking equivalence and fairness. There's no fairness in this country. The people are afraid of those protesters. They're not afraid of a few Jews. There's so few Jews in this country, so few Jews in the world.
But Paul's point was interesting, wasn't it? That they'd been saying all along, these marches are peaceful.
Yeah.
There's nothing to worry about. Well, if these marches are peaceful, why are they worried about someone who's obviously Jewish? You make a very good point there.
But
it's not. Go on, sorry. Liz.
Yeah, but you've hit the nail on the head. Is people are afraid of these people who are marching. They're afraid of it, and if the cops are afraid of it. So if the cops, you shouldn't fire this guy. He knows he can't bring his troops in.
Maybe they're afraid because of some of the anti-Semitic placards that people are carrying and that kind of thing.
Or terrorism, maybe,
anyway.
or what's gone on around the world historically, or the arena bombing, or the fact that we as English...
No, I agree. People are intimidated. That is true. Let's move on to a question from Ryan.
Good evening.
Hello.
Should mayors shut down right-wing conferences?
Mayors as in the horses?
As in... No,
I don't like them getting involved in politics.
As in mayors of cities.
Okay. Oh, yes. So this is to do with the NatCon conference, of course, in Brussels. Sorry, I'm being childish.
No, you're being rude. He schlepped his way all the way here to the studio on a Sunday night, and you're like, basically...
Hey, I've schlepped all my way from the South Atlantic Ocean.
It's your show.
Here.
It's your show. I tell you, people are so lazy.
This is the NatCon conference, of course, in Brussels. It was briefly closed down. The mayor was saying, they want to shut it down because right-wing people were speaking. The police initially carried it out. And, people like Suella Braverman, Nigel Farage, what's going on?
Well, the idea that being Conservative now should be illegal and shut down is quite preposterous. There's only one side of politics now, and it has to be whatever is dictated by the mob.
What was the justification here?
The justification? There is no justification. The point is that they just didn't want those voices to be heard.
Right.
I think that particular mayor was of a certain bent politically, and he didn't want to hear those voices.
But what I don't understand about that is, can he not see that once you set that precedent, it will be used against him when someone else is in charge?
You'd think that he would, because all he's really done is given... No one would have known NatCon was going on, let's be honest. Maybe a few of us may have known, but most people wouldn't have known it was going on.
I think we'd have known.
Yeah.
Nigel was there.
Yeah, we knew, but what I mean is the greater public had no idea, I don't think. And as a result, they now all know about it. And collectively, they're all wondering what's going on. I've heard voices on the left going, well, this is ridiculous.
Well, because, believe it or not, there are still some voices on the left who believe that free speech and free assembly is important. I know they're dwindling in number,
incredible.
But there are still some on the left sticking out. Come on, Lewis, you're going to say that they should have shut it down. I know that.
Well, it's a threat to them. It's part of what I have said for years now. There's a war going on between nation states and Team World, which is the idea of this kumbaya German-French left-wing axis, which have no borders, which have no boundaries, which people can do what they want to do.
Was it Team World who was shutting down the...
Yes, it was called the National Conservative, right? And that people are against the nation states.
Isn't the broader problem that there's a growing intolerance in these times of political tribalism to anyone with a dissenting point of view? It isn't just that you disagree, it's that you're evil, and therefore, if you're evil, we can justify shutting you down.
Yes, that's true, because it's like what you talk about, the silos, you got to be completely in one silo or you're in the other silo.
And I do say, Lewis, we see this historically on all sides of the political spectrum. I don't think it's just a left-wing problem. I think the right... throughout history have done this as well. It just so happens that at the moment, the left are the ones that, for some reason, think authoritarianism is the way to go.
Because I'll tell you what the explanation is. You should just ask me.
Of course, I should just ask you.
I thought you were going to ask me, Lewis.
Is because they're winning. They are winning, and they think that they have the weight of the world and the moral consciousness on their side, and there's more of them than there are.
OK. Well, let's get another question now. Let's move on to Carol. Carol, hello.
Hello, good evening. Will the smoking ban save the NHS?
Well, yeah. Now, I know they'd introduced this in New Zealand, hadn't they?
Yeah.
And this is the smoking ban. So, effectively, it means that if you were born after, I think it was 2007, you won't be able to buy cigarettes as an adult throughout the rest of your life. And they're sort of putting... Now, when I heard about when they introduced this with New Zealand, I genuinely thought, that's insane. At least it wouldn't happen here. And I'm not a smoker, by the way, but I like smokers.
Some of them are OK, aren't they?
Some of them are OK. No, I actually like being around them. I like the smell.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?
It's nice. But the thing is, my grandmother used to chain smoke around me when I was in the crib, so maybe it's to do with that. But the thing is, don't you think this is an odd thing, that ultimately this is... Well, that phrase, the nanny state, is kind of overused. But it is true that if the government is saying what you can choose to do with your body...
Oh, we would love the nanny state now. I mean, this is beyond the nanny state now. This is like authoritarian nanny state. It's like Mary Poppins...
But this is the Conservatives.
After being addicted to crack. But...
What version of Mary Poppins did you see?
There's a new one on Netflix, Andrew. You'll catch up with it. But, I don't think it does save the NHS.
Right.
I think because the biggest killer isn't cigarettes.
What is it?
It's fat people. They're not sitting on anyone. I'm not going around sitting on people, but heart disease.
Well, there are all sorts of ways in which you can put a burden on the NHS needlessly. But alcohol... alcohol's a much bigger problem, surely.
Absolutely. And I'm a libertarian. I think people should be able to kill themselves however they want. You know, they should be able to go out there. The NHS shouldn't have to support that, by the way. That's not my counter-argument to it.
Isn't the point that it's all very well informing the public of the dangers of alcohol, the dangers of cigarettes? I think that's fine. And then, as long as people are informed, they can make their own choices properly, right? But what you can't have is the NHS say, we're not going to treat you if you get ill for something that you've inflicted on yourself. I mean, that could never work, could it?
Well, they're not treating us for things that we don't inflict on ourselves. I mean, the NHS is, like, famous for not treating people.
Well, there's that.
So it's like one more thing they're not treating you for. You didn't even realise you were not treated. Anything that comes out of New Zealand is going to be rubbish. Nothing personal.
Well, wait a minute.
Jacinta Ardern, shark attacks, tattoos.
Lord of the Rings. That was great.
Yeah, tattoos.
Anyway, we've got to move on, unfortunately, Lewis.
Okay.
I was enjoying that, but we don't have time. But next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be starting our investigation into the findings of the landmark Cass review into child gender services, and we'll be joined by the barrister Sarah Finnemore. So please do not go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In every corner of the world, people celebrate English tradition and values as members of the Royal Society of St George. Yet here in England, branches are closing as membership dwindles.
I feel that in this country, St George is all but dead and buried.
Until recently, Stephen Warden from Wigston was president of the Leicestershire branch. Despite spending £1,500 of his own money advertising, he couldn't find enough members to keep it running.
I did everything humanly possible to get new members into the branch from the local environment, but they were just not interested in joining.
He thinks changing demographics and declining interest in the society's values contributed to disappearing membership. But he also blames political leadership at national and local levels. Stephen claims his proposal for a St George's Day parade was repeatedly rejected by Leicester City Council over 10 years. A celebration is planned for St George's Day, but like most cities and towns, no parade will pass through the streets. A Leicester City Council spokesperson said, "Leicester's annual celebrations of St George's Day have been organised and funded by the City Council for many decades, and they remain an important part of the city's festival calendar." Some in Leicester say they would like to see more done to celebrate England's patron saint.
I think it's a sign of patriotism. I think it helps the country. We celebrate a lot of religious festivals here.
People forget, I think, what is important to England.
Maybe it's been sort of jumped onto with the wrong crowd, but
I think nowadays it's just completely different.
Back in Wigston, St George's Cross flies above Stephen's home.
It makes me feel good because I know at least I've not forgotten St George if everybody else has.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So just over a week ago, Dr. Hilary Cass, the former president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, produced her much-awaited review of the NHS's gender identity services for children and young people. And the report found that the evidence base for gender medicine in young people was thin, and children had been let down by a toxic public discourse around gender. And it also found that the now closed Gender Identity Development Service, or GIDS, at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust used puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones despite remarkably weak evidence that they improved the health of young people. So here to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by the barrister and campaigner, Sarah Phillimore. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to have you. Let's talk about the Cass review then. What do you think are the most important findings from your perspective?
Well, I think there's about 31 recommendations. A lot of it is about the service that children need.
Yes.
Because this clearly isn't a report saying being trans is wrong, let's stop it. It's saying there are lots of children who are very distressed, the current services are letting them down. So a lot of the recommendations are looking at the nitty-gritty of how services should develop. What I'm particularly interested in are the recommendations, well, obviously the puberty blockers, we already knew that they weren't going to be prescribed because the NHS changed its policy on the 14th of March.
Yes.
What's very interesting, though, is what she says about the cross-sex hormones, because the NHS did have quite a strict policy about how they were to be prescribed. Cass has said, because the evidence is so awful, I mean, you said it was thin. I think what the BMJ said, commenting on the Cass review, is that there is an evidence void. So she has said extreme caution is needed, and recommendation 9 is possibly the most interesting. There will have to be effectively a second opinion for any prescription. A multidisciplinary team will need to review any decision to prescribe to a 16-year-old. Now, that's interesting because no private clinic can offer that. And
Yes.
there's one private clinic at the moment, Gender Plus, who is regulated by the CQC to prescribe hormones. Now, I think the CQC need to look again at its regulation criteria. And, of course, you're aware there is a judicial review coming of its decision to regulate Gender Plus.
Yes, well, I saw Dr. Alan Kelly, who was from a private gender clinic, sort of an interview on Novara Media, saying that we can prescribe these to you. Don't worry, you can work around the NHS, effectively selling the drugs. But actually, it looks like that isn't going to be possible.
I hope it won't be. I mean, the thing about Dr. Kelly is we know his provenance. He comes from the Tavistock, and so do all his staff. They are wedded to the affirmation path. And that, to me, has been the most chilling thing about the reaction to the Cass review. Not, oh, crikey, we may have got this horribly wrong, but she's a transphobe, she's a fascist, it's wrong. Let's just get on with giving children what they say they need.
Although that was probably a predictable response from a lot of activists.
I'm shocked, perhaps naively so. I thought there'd be a lot more embarrassed silence. I didn't expect to see, for example, Patrick Harvey refusing to admit it was wrong to call this a transphobic report, even in the light of Dr. Cass reporting she's been advised not to use public transport now. I mean, have you ever known anything like this?
I mean, that element is, of course, very shocking. And, this is one of the senior paediatricians in the world. A rigorous report over 4 years. It should be taken seriously, absolutely. But you're right, a lot of people aren't doing so. So how do we deal with that? Because ultimately there is this kind of brick wall mentality among certain people who just didn't... It didn't come up with what they wanted it to come up with.
Well, I hope it's the dead cat bounce. It's the desperate panicked reaction of a group of people who have married not just their reputations, but their very sanity to there being truth in an ideology that says children as young as 3 have a gender identity, they know it, and our job as adults is simply to guide them on that pathway to medication and then surgery. I wonder if that's what we're seeing, and that hopefully will at some stage wear itself out. But going back to the private clinics, we know we've got hopefully the judicial review coming up of Gender Plus that will look at their regulation. We've got the other problem, though, haven't we, of gender GP. Now, remember, Dr. Mike Weberly was struck off after providing puberty blockers to a 9-year-old following a 20-minute Zoom call during which the child did not speak. There were lots of other patients. I think there are at least 21 he was investigated regarding. His wife, Dr. Helen, managed to escape being struck off despite never discussing issues of fertility with an 11-year-old girl and her mother for whom she prescribed testosterone. Now, Dr. Helen Weberly has been utterly unrepentant about this and says, basically, sod the Cass review, sod the NHS, we'll give the kids what they need. So I think the government's really got to show its commitment to some of the encouraging statements. There needs to be action taken against these people.
Now, when you say action, do you mean criminal action?
Yes, I think it should be criminalised to do what Helen Weberly is doing, to exist outside of UK regulation and be prescribing testosterone to young girls. And I think if the government doesn't act, and I'm really actually pleased by some of the strong pronouncements made, then we must act by way of private prosecution, because we've got Cass now as our ethical and factual ballast. So if the government won't act or are slow to act, then we've got to do it.
Is there a fear, though? I mean, I'm talking later in the show to Dr. Carrie Mendoza from America about how it's being received over there, and I noticed that the American media are barely touching this. I notice when things are going up about this that are supportive of the Cass review on YouTube, they're getting hit with context notes by YouTube. You know, there's a big weight of global opinion that has a prejudice against Cass and the findings of her review.
We just have to continue in this country to do what we can to protect children and hope that message is taken up abroad. Obviously, we can't interfere with what the US decides to do legally, but it's a very significant note that Cass found only Sweden and Finland to produce reliable guidelines and found WPATH discredited. Now, I know what's recently happened in America with Biden passing into law gender identity on a par with sex. I think it's now for Americans to take the wheel in their own country. We will do what we can for American children, but obviously we can't influence their laws. But one thing that is coming down the track, remember the 9,000 children who were funneled through the Tavistock, 6 out of 7 of the gender clinics refused to cooperate with Cass and give her the data. Now, that can only be for 2 reasons. A, they didn't keep the data, they're going to be revealed as incompetent, or B, they know exactly what that data is going to show. Remarkably poor outcomes for that cohort.
Well, we don't have data sufficiently on detransitioners or regret in later life, and partly it's because, as you say, there's this reticence to either hand it over or maybe it just doesn't exist.
Well, that's the other big lie that's taken hold, isn't it? That only 1% of people detransition. And as Cass makes clear, there is simply no evidence to make any assertion about detransition. However, I would note that the Reddit group for detransitioners, I think now has 57,000 members. There's legal actions being brought in the States. There's legal actions here, Richie Herron. So that is the other big lie that we need to topple. I don't know what the rate is, but my suspicion is it's going to have to be more than 1%, because you're looking at a group of children often with internalised homophobia, mental health comorbidities, adverse childhood experiences, being given medication as the cure for everything that ailed them. And of course it won't be.
Can I ask you a bigger question? You mentioned earlier the affirming approach, and the idea of gender affirming care is that a child says they're in the wrong body, says that they have an innate gender identity, and the doctor must immediately affirm that. But isn't this effectively a kind of pseudo-religious belief? And if that's the case, why is the NHS even entertaining it to begin with?
Oh, absolutely. I've been saying that for a long time. And so have many others. It's not me being particularly clever. Gender identity is like the soul. You see the reaction when you go against gender identity. It's the same as a fervently religious person when you say you don't believe. The anger, the rage, the lack of evidence, the punishment for the apostate. That's very clear. I mean, it's going to be, I hope, in about 10 years' time, there'll be a lot of books written about how the hell did this happen. But I think the groundwork was laid decades ago. see the Jakarta principles. A lot of money seemed to be funneled into this in the late 90s about how gender identity was going to be elevated above sex at any cost. It became a human rights, a civil liberties issue, and then for some bizarre reason, we haven't quite got to the bottom of this yet, doctors were persuaded to go against the fundamental ethical tenets of their profession. First, do no harm. If you're going to be innovative, that's wonderful. We need doctors to be innovative, but they need to collect the data.
Well, what do you say to the critics of the review who will say, but data when it comes to paediatric medicine is notoriously difficult to locate, and actually we shouldn't be I mean, Dr. Aidan Kelly, on that very interview that I mentioned, said that actually, yeah, we'd love to have that gold standard of firm data on everything, but actually it's neither possible nor desirable when it comes to gender
that
medicine.
just seems to me such an insanely stupid thing to say when we know that 9,000 children have gone through the Tavistock. Where are they now? Are they living their best lives, happy and transitioned? I hope they are. You see, Andrew, I would be delighted to be wrong about this, because if I am right, that is 9,000 children who've been deprived of fertility, of adult sexual function, and it was all done for an adult ideology with no evidence base. And I think the difference, I know everyone's saying, oh, it's both sides, it's both sides. I think the difference between my side and the gender identity side is I will be delighted to be wrong, and I will say hallelujah. The other side, however, when that data comes in and shows what I believe it will, that cohort had their lives blighted, they will simply lie about it, as we've seen now.
Well, that's another criticism of Cass, isn't it? That actually she hasn't been sufficiently compassionate to the children involved here. I've read the review and I don't think that's the case at all.
Well, you cannot say that in good faith unless you have some quite serious learning difficulty. The compassion that she feels for this children is fundamentally displayed throughout that report. She directly addresses the children she knows she is going to disappoint. But this is the dynamic between adults and children. We don't say, I will give you everything you want, so you'll be my friend and you'll love me. You say, I am the adult here, and I'm not going to give you what you want, I'm going to give you what you need because you are a child and I know better. So that is effectively what she says, and she says it with deep compassion. So that's just another lie, another very stupid and irritating lie.
Sarah Phillimore, thank you ever so much for joining me. So next on Free Speech Nation, not all commentators have accepted the Cass review unreservedly. Barrister Robin Moira White will be here to explain why some people have issues with the report. Don't go anywhere.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So after a drier end to the weekend for many of us today, it looks like change is on the way. An area of low pressure situated out to the north of the UK brings some weak frontal systems that will slowly sink their way southwards, particularly into the start of the new working week, and that area of high pressure we've seen pushes away towards the northwest. So a cloudy end to the day for much of eastern Scotland and northern England as that rain continues to sink its way southwards overnight, so quite a cloudy picture quite across the board into the early hours of Monday morning. But southeastern parts of England still holding on to some clearer skies, and we could even see some frost here, although not quite as cold under all that cloud and rain, and particularly across parts of Scotland holding up into the high single figures. So a cloudier start for many of us on Monday, particularly compared to what we saw over the weekend, and this rain continues to spread its way southwards through Monday daytime, not turning particularly heavy, but definitely a grey and damp day compared to the recent couple of days. Northern parts of Scotland probably seeing the best of the sunshine through the afternoon. I'm feeling warm here with highs of 14 or 15 degrees, but definitely feeling much chillier across much of England and Wales under all that cloud and rain. That cloud and rain does eventually clear its way towards the southeast to start on Tuesday, so there will be some brighter spells, particularly for the northern half of the UK. Plenty of sunshine around through the morning. 1 or 2 showers bubbling up through the afternoon, particularly along some North Sea coastal regions, and staying quite cloudy in the southeast through the afternoon. Further showers on their way through Wednesday and Thursday, but hints of low pressure returning as we head towards the second half of the week.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So we've been hearing tonight about some of the damning conclusions drawn by the Cass Review into the provision of gender identity services for under-18s by NHS England. However, we also need to acknowledge that some commentators argue that the report paints a distorted picture. So here to discuss some of these concerns, I'm delighted to be joined by the barrister Robin Moira-White. Welcome to the show. Now, Robin, you are not a fan of the Cass Review. You described the research undertaken by Dr. Hilary Cass as laughably poor. Can you explain why you've come to that conclusion?
Yeah, I think let's start from the fact that trans people have felt let down over years by our government and services. So if you're an adult, the waiting time currently is decades to be seen. And I think what most people feel is most trans people feel is a fundamental sadness that here was an opportunity wasted. Now, it would take longer than your show to grind through the science. So I've tried to make some quick points with a few graphics that would help. And I'm grateful to your folk for getting those ready. If we could put the first slide up, the first picture up. Now, this is the Women's Rights Conference in Saudi Arabia. Is there a missing element? Women. And that's the first position with the Cass Review, that at a very early stage it was determined that people who are, you were talking about different approaches in terms of affirmation, that no one who supports affirmation could be part of the core study, and there is no trans person who was part of the core group. Would that imagine a report on women's rights with no women in the group, or gay rights with not a gay people, and deliberately exclude it? So, in terms of, I assume what you were talking about there is the studies that were deemed to be too low quality to include in the final review. Is that no? I'm looking at that's a point about the review overall.
Yes.
So I'll come on to some specific criticisms.
Dr. Cass did speak to a number of people who've been through this treatment, and
she did
took a very compassionate approach in doing so.
Indeed, but I'm looking at the outcomes of the report. And let's move on to the presentation. If we could put the first graph up that I supplied. Now, this is actually a page from the report. And you can see that what you have is an exponential rise, apparently, in the number of people being referred to GIDS at Tavistock. The trouble with it is that graph cuts off at 2014. And if we put the next graph up, right, here are the true figures and the figures for the next few years. And what you actually see is that the graph we've seen is a slice of the data, and the data have plateaued. So the number of referrals, instead of that scary exponential rise, and the report doesn't make this point. And indeed, we have data later than the graph that I'm showing here, which shows that actually the number of people reported have plateaued. And the report doesn't say that.
So to be clear, your view is that the exponential rise, which I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with, that has taken place, but you feel that it's not so much of a worry because it has since plateaued, and that should have been mentioned by the Cass Review.
And isn't. And if what we were looking at is, I mean, one of the ways in which young people have been let down is the immensely long waiting time, so that they were through puberty before they were going to get help. And a scary graph like that is saying, well, look, we can't cope with this, whereas actually we know what the numbers are.
I do understand what you're saying about the strength of feeling and the way in which that some people will feel let down because the conclusions reached, the findings reached, didn't align with what they wanted them to say. But, of course, ultimately, this is, you know, a very reputable paediatrician working very rigorously for 4 years' time. I don't think it's fair. Surely it's not fair. It should be taken seriously in terms of what her findings
I'm sorry,
reveal.
I've not looked at the reputation. I've been looking at what the outcomes and the outputs. And there are some very weird things said in the report. The report says, for example, that providing puberty blockers does not alleviate, it hasn't been shown to alleviate gender dysphoria. Well, it's never intended to. All it does is not make matters worse. Now, it's a very weird thing to say, that something doesn't do what it was never intended to do.
I suppose my concern here is that it feels like you're taking small things that you disagree with from a 388-page report and using that as a means to kind of, they call it nut-picking, don't they, to sort of just try and discredit the whole thing. Yeah. Isn't the broad point, though, of concern to you that the CAS's broad finding about puberty blockers, that there is no evidential threshold, no basis in evidence for their efficacy? Shouldn't that be of concern? If we don't have the data about what happens in later life, shouldn't that concern you?
Well, we do have data. I mean, for example, in the last week or so, a 9,000-person study based in Perth in Australia was published that provides exactly that information. And one of the really concerning things about the report is that the recommendation is to move from a type of treatment to effectively no treatment or any talking therapy. And where is the evidence that talking therapy is efficacious?
Sorry, but the 9,000 people in the Perth study, what's the findings of that?
That that there is no loss of data. So one of the criticisms that's being made is that we don't find the detransitioners because they go off and hide.
Yes.
Now the Perth study says no, we have complete follow-up because the Australian system is rather different from ours. There is a holistic approach in Australia, and they stay with the people concerned. And it's supporting the level of detransition that's been reported previously, around the 1% mark.
But my understanding is that the existing studies that we have that have some kind of follow-up only retain that follow-up if people are still identified as trans and are reporting back to the doctors.
Well, some of them do. That's absolutely true. And I am not going to say that it's not good to have better data.
Right.
But to say that the data we have supports effectively a do-nothing approach, for which there is no evidence.
But Cass isn't really saying let's not do, she's not ruling anything out. What she's saying is we need to have the data before we undertake what could be very, very damaging medical procedures on children.
Understanding what Cass actually says is really difficult because there was an organisation called the Kent Trust who met with Dr. Cass shortly after that. And the last slide I'd asked for is a quote from the meeting with Dr. Cass. Do we have that, please? Yeah, and there we are. So is that message consistent with what's being said by the people who are lauding the report and saying, gosh, that's great, we're not going to do this anymore?
But isn't that precisely what she's saying, is that we need more evidence, we need more long-term studies, we need data, we needed all of those 7 adult gender clinics to provide that data rather than deliberately withholding it. I mean, 6 out of the 7, that's troubling, isn't it?
What's troubling is that they were sufficiently concerned about the approach of the report that they withheld that data. Now, I don't think we have a complete clarity as to why at the moment.
Yes.
And it's important to see that.
But Cass does acknowledge that there are some people that she has met for whom the puberty-blocking treatment has been helpful, right? So that is something that is acknowledged.
Yeah, and I'm being careful about not talking about... anecdotally, I know young trans people who have been through the process which is being looked at and are living very successful lives and very happy lives. And it's right to look at the balance between those a process helps and those a process doesn't help.
Yes.
But to just junk the evidence that we do have and say, not good enough.
I'm just concerned about the idea that evidence was junked. It was there was a selectivity regarding the quality of evidence, and that the high quality studies were retained. The highest quality of which there were 2, and then the high quality studies and the medium quality studies, and that those findings were indeed incorporated into the final review. So it's not the case that she was junking every particular view.
With respect, they're not. The medium quality studies provide a large body of evidence that says this is a helpful approach.
Yes.
And we don't have evidence for the do-nothing approach. And though that evidence does not find its way through into the report's conclusions.
But you wouldn't support low-quality studies making their way into... Because you'll end up with a misleading...
Well, we had high, medium and low, and we had quite a lot of medium-quality studies. And the double-blind study, I think Cass has now acknowledged that you can't do a double-blind study in this area.
That's right, yeah.
You just can't give people a placebo and not put them through puberty when they're expecting a block.
No, and that was never asserted or attempted. That's why the Newcastle-Ottawa scale was adopted instead.
That's right. But there is still a suggestion that there has to be a control group for it to be a high-quality study. And that means you're never going to get anything like a high-quality study.
But I think that's why the medium-quality studies were incorporated into the findings.
They're incorporated, but they don't follow through into the recommendations. Now, that process is ongoing. There are a number of trans-related organisations that are working their way through the report. And in the coming weeks, I think you're going to see the reasons why Cass has been panned internationally, as I'm sure you know. You were mentioning this a little earlier on your show. Cass has been panned internationally, is not supported internationally.
Well, I've seen that from activist bodies. I haven't seen that from...
like the American... The relevant medical association in America, who've already said that, who are not activists.
Groups such as WPATH, which I do...
No, forgive me. The group of American doctors who treat people in this circumstance in America have already said that they don't like the look of Cass.
No, and my contention is that activist bodies have infiltrated most medical institutions.
Well, I don't think that's true.
Well, but let me ask you, though, if it were the case that ultimately we did have all the data, and ultimately it did turn out that this wasn't that maybe this was right for certain individuals, but for the majority it wasn't. It was detrimental. Would you at that point say, well, let's find a different approach?
I think the point you and I would agree on is that there are definitely individuals for whom this approach is right, and there are definitely individuals for whom this approach will ultimately turn out to be wrong. And I'm sure neither you nor I would disagree about that. And finding where the balance is between that, like with any form of medical treatment, is the right thing to do. But if you get medical treatment that's really helpful for a substantial group, to say we wait forever to work out how tiny the group is that aren't helped, when we've good evidence, it may not be the best evidence in the world, but good evidence that it's really helpful for a large group, then we shouldn't be avoiding people being able to access that type of care.
I think that's also where the contention lies, because I don't think Cass and the findings would suggest that there is good evidence for that. And I think she's suggesting we need to have the evidence before we proceed.
Which is obvious, which brings us back to the quality of the work that's been done.
OK. Well, Robin, I'm thrilled that you've come on to talk about this, and I hope you'll come back again to continue.
Very happy.
Thanks very much for speaking to me. So, after the break, Bev Jackson from LGB Alliance will be here to tell us about whether the practices exposed by the Cass Review amount to attack on gay rights. Please do not go anywhere.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales is now officially the most popular royal. This is a YouGov poll that found that over 75% of people have a positive view of Princess Catherine, with Prince William only slightly behind his wife at 73%. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, is here with this one. Well, what would you read into that, and as to why?
Well, I think it's hardly surprising. Since the start of the year, the Princess of Wales's popularity is up 6 points with the British public, according to this YouGov poll. And obviously, at the start of the year, she went into hospital for abdominal surgery and has subsequently been diagnosed with cancer and is undergoing surgery. Look, the Princess of Wales, since becoming a member of the royal family, has committed no major faux pas. There's been no particular scandal with her. She always puts family first. And I hate the phrase born a commoner, but she wasn't born into aristocracy. She was not born into the royal family. She gave up her old life. And yes, that comes with lots of privilege, being a member of the royal family, but it also comes with enormous challenges, such as everybody prying into your private life, particularly when it comes to your health. And I think the British public are very much on side with that.
Whereas Prince Harry and Meghan continue to be unpopular. 76 compared to 31% having a positive opinion of Prince Harry, and only 26%, 50 points less, and Princess Catherine is Meghan.
Yes, it's still not looking great for Harry and Meghan. Prince Andrew is far below them as well.
Doing well on negative views, meaning fewer people have negative views about her than anyone else, is the Princess Royal, Princess Anne.
Indeed, yes. The most hard-working royal, if you go by the number of engagements she carries out each year. No nonsense, no fuss. She never gets herself into any kind of arguments or scandals.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Returning now to the Cass review, and one of the many concerns raised is that many of the young people treated by the NHS are same-sex orientated, and they're being steered towards drugs so they can align with their so-called gender identity. And many organisations who promote this questionable doctrine are those who were originally set up to promote gay rights. So here to discuss this, I'm joined by one of the co-founders of LGB Alliance, Bev Jackson. Welcome to the show. Very quickly, Bev, firstly, what was your reaction to the Cass review?
Well, obviously, I'm pleased that that it's now clear from such an eminent paediatrician and an eminent team of researchers that there is no sound evidence for this treatment that has been given to mostly teenage girls.
Yes.
I'm glad that that is out there, but pretty horrified that it's been treated as a political thing instead of a medical thing. This is a review of healthcare.
Yes.
And in what other area of healthcare would you find people treating it in this way? All these adult clinics refusing to give their evidence. We wanted long-term evidence. What is the long-term outcome?
I mean, that is suggestive, isn't it? That 6 of the 7 adult clinics refused to hand over the data would suggest a degree of ideological capture. It cannot, you know, there's no other alternative at this point,
Well, if you think this is really good treatment, if you believe in the affirmative care model, then surely you would be very pleased to show, yes, this is brilliant, it works out very well. They didn't want to do it, and now I find even more shocking is a template is circulating for former patients encouraging them to say, we don't want our data to be used for research.
Yes.
So there is a profound reluctance to get the research out there, and then they say, oh, well, there isn't enough research. It's just ridiculous.
In terms of gay rights, the Cass review very specifically shows that 89% of the girls referred were same-sex attracted, either homosexual or bisexual, and 81% of the boys fall into that category. So this is overwhelmingly affecting kids who are likely to grow up gay.
Yeah. It's really, really disturbing. And everybody used to accept that. I mean, if you go back to the year, I think, around 2000, even mermaids were saying, of course, the overwhelming majority of kids presenting with I think they called it in those days it was gender identity disorder.
Yes.
Then they wanted to call it later gender dysphoria, and now they're calling it gender incongruence. They're trying to make it less and less medical, and yet insisting on more and more treatment. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, even mermaids were saying in the year 2000 that most of these kids would simply grow up lesbian or gay. And it was known everywhere. It was known in Holland also. And it's extraordinary that that now is being suppressed. And you're not seeing in the coverage, although there is that graph, which stops, unfortunately, at 2016. And that's because they didn't have any figures after that. Obviously, Cass wanted the figures after 2016. But, and I know that quite a few of the
the therapists who worked at the GIDS simply didn't ask about sexual orientation because they didn't think it was relevant.
But it is, of course, so relevant if this, you know, if this is a gay rights issue. And fundamentally, what's particularly disturbing is that the gender-affirming model and the very notion of a gender identity has been pushed by Stonewall, the foremost supposedly gay charity in the country, and other groups of its kind.
Yeah, and I think that what happened, if you replace the whole idea of, if you call homosexuality, say you change it from being same-sex sexual orientation, which that is what it is, that's what it was when I was setting up the Gay Liberation Front, and that still is what it is, that's sexual orientation. If you suddenly call it same gender orientation, so that theoretically, and not even theoretically, two men can call themselves women and then be a lesbian couple, you're making a mockery of what homosexuality is. And that removes, in the same way that it's removing women's rights by changing sex to gender, you're also removing the rights and the definition of homosexuality by changing sex to gender identity.
So given that Stonewall has been so complicit in this movement, is it now time, finally, for Stonewall to be driven out of public life?
Well, I represent a charity. I don't think it's for me publicly to talk about the work of another charity. Obviously, as you know, we set up LGBT Alliance because we were unable to talk to Stonewall in those days. We didn't really want... We had no idea that this was a great thing to do at this stage of life, to set up a new organisation. We thought, no, we need to engage with Stonewall and so that they realise that this is having a really bad effect on young gays and lesbians. We will talk to them, and it was just a complete blank wall, no debate, and also there's no conflict between these rights. And this is so obviously not true, and it was only because we could not get through, we could not get a dialogue going, that we had to set up LGBT Alliance. But I want to say, look, this is an age of misogyny. It's an extraordinary age of misogyny. We see in Scotland, with the bill coming, that people going to be protected by the new bill against misogyny will include men who identify as women. That is getting rid of women's rights. We see what's happening with the new rules for Title IX in America. Also will include men who identify as women. And the women who are impacted most by this are lesbians, who are impacted, as we say in our mission statement, doubly as women and as homosexuals. And the fact that we now know, and we know that young lesbians are being told, if they've got short hair or they fall for other girls, oh, maybe you're really a boy. And then some of them are susceptible to that, and they go and they take puberty blockers. And we now know all the harm that can be done by that, and we're pleased to see that that is now very, very clear from this report.
Thanks, Bev, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a very short while.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So after a drier end to the weekend for many of us today, it looks like change is on the way. An area of low pressure situated out to the north of the UK brings some weak frontal systems that will slowly sink their way southwards, particularly into the start of the new working week. And that area of high pressure we've seen pushes away towards the northwest. So a cloudy end to the day for much of eastern Scotland and northern England as that rain continues to sink its way southwards overnight. So quite a cloudy picture quite across the board into the early hours of Monday morning. But southeastern parts of England still holding on to some clearer skies, and we could even see some frost here, although not quite as cold under all that cloud and rain, and particularly across parts of Scotland holding up into the high single figures. So a cloudier start for many of us on Monday, particularly compared to what we saw over the weekend, and this rain continues to spread its way southwards through Monday daytime, not turning particularly heavy, but definitely a grey and damp day compared to the recent couple of days. Northern parts of Scotland probably seeing the best of the sunshine through the afternoon. I'm feeling warm here with highs of 14 or 15 degrees, but definitely feeling much chillier across much of England and Wales under all that cloud and rain. That cloud and rain does eventually clear its way towards the southeast to start on Tuesday, so there will be some brighter spells, particularly for the northern half of the UK. Plenty of sunshine around through the morning. 1 or 2 showers bubbling up through the afternoon, particularly along some North Sea coastal regions, and staying quite cloudy in the southeast through the afternoon. Further showers on their way through Wednesday and Thursday, but hints of low pressure returning as we head towards the second half of the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather. on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
TfL bosses have come under fire after banning an advert... Oh, God. They've banned an advert for a comedy show because it had a hot dog on it, because that supposedly promotes obesity.
The comedian Ed Gamble has swapped the image of the fast food favourite in favour of a cucumber instead. And there's the cucumber on the plate.
So is the UK turning into a nanny state? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, and nutritionist Olivia Parry. Good to see you both this morning. Olivia, it's a comedy show. He's not promoting eating hot dogs, is he? Is this just a load of nonsense?
The thing is, we have a huge problem with overweight and obesity in this country. We're fourth in Europe. It's big business. Advertising for food companies is big business. They make so much money. You just have to switch on primetime TV to watch, food after food advertisements. And it's for the youngsters as well, who don't have the nutritional education. We're not taught cookery in school anymore. People go to college and to university, they don't know how to cook.
But
and it leads
forgive me for jumping in, Olivia. Forgive me for jumping in, but the whole point with this is it's an advert for a comedy show.
Yes, I know, but this is a wider issue.
I think it's a load of old tosh, to be quite honest with you. It's a hot dog. In fact, I wish they'd have put onions on the hot dog. A bit of what you fancy won't hurt you. You should eat 80-20 anyway. We talk about a nanny state. I actually think, arguably, we're becoming an authoritarian state. Opinions banned. Comedy banned. The England flag banned. It's like we've got to wear a virtual muzzle.
There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week, including reaction to the Cass report from the US, this week's social sensations, and some more questions from this wonderful studio audience. But let's get a news update first from Sophia Wensler.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour, Mark Menzies has announced his resignation from the Tory party, saying he won't be standing in the next election. The Fylde MP was suspended following claims he used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off bad people who had locked him in a flat. He disputes the allegations, though. Following an investigation, the Conservative Party says it can't conclude there was a misuse of funds, but said there was a pattern of behaviour that falls below the standards expected of MPs. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, will meet Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley tomorrow to discuss community relations. It comes as Sir Mark Rowley is facing calls to quit over his handling of pro-Palestinian protests, with the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, suggesting he's emboldened anti-Semites. The campaign against anti-Semitism is also calling for Sir Mark to resign or be sacked after its chief executive was described as openly Jewish by an officer. The Met Police have now responded in a statement saying the Assistant Commissioner has written to Gideon Falter to offer a private meeting to apologise. A decision by the US to approve £49 billion in aid for Ukraine has been welcomed by the UK, with the Foreign Secretary describing it as a vital step forward. After months of wrangling, American politicians ended a deadlock, agreeing to provide a package which will also help replenish weapons and munitions. President Zelensky says the move will keep the war from expanding and will save thousands of lives. It now heads to the Senate, which is expected to pass the bill in the next few days. And a record 50,000 people ran the London Marathon today. Most have now crossed the finishing line after completing the 26.2-mile route. They started just after 10 a.m. this morning, the event raising millions of pounds for charities. Our very own GB News political editor, Chris Hope, was one of the many who crossed the finishing line today.
Well, I've done it. I got round 26.2 miles, 5 hours, 8 minutes, a bit slower than normal for me. Had a very sore left hip at some point. That was really hard, but here's the proof, here's the medal. That's why you do these kind of things. We raised, I think, over £7,000 for Scope. I'll check on it online later. It's a great cause. It's moving, it's exhausting, and it's well worth the effort. And if you're mad like me, why not try and run it?
For the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Free Speech Nation.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So it's high time we get some more questions from this lovely studio audience. Our first question of this section comes from Rob. Where is Rob?
Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Should schools be appointing children as young as 4 years old as LGBT champions?
Rob, what do you think?
I think it's insane.
And this is Scottish schools,
It
isn't
is
it,
Scottish,
who are doing this? Yeah, starting to appoint kids as young as 4. Kids as young as 4 don't know anything about this stuff, do they? Let's be honest.
No, they don't at all.
They've got a clue.
And I'm a parent to a 14, 15-year-old now, and I've anecdotally seen this repeated as well. When children are introduced to sexual relationships and the knowledge of sexual relationships at a very young age, it does confuse them. I do remember a story with my daughter where she was confused to the point that if you're told about lesbianism as a 7 or 8-year-old and you don't know what that means, but you realise that your love for your friends is strong and you primarily love the girls in your group because you're a girl, my daughter confused that as being a lesbian, and she used to talk to us about it and say, I think I might be gay because I like X instead of this boy. And
because they're pre-sexual, so...
They're pre-sexual, they have absolutely no idea. And, of course, at that point, as a parent, you're very open and encouraging. You're saying, well, don't worry about that, darling. We can talk about it if you like, but it's not important now. Yeah. But what you realise is they're just being confused with adult stuff as a child.
Isn't it strange, though? Why is... I mean, this is from a charity called LGBT Youth Scotland. Now, we're not talking about sex education in secondary schools. There is a problem there if kids aren't told about stuff, but this is different, right? This is something else. 4 years old? Lewis is speechless. For the first time, he's lost for words. That says a lot.
It is, because I'm always, concerned about how you were, obsessed with this. And the truth is, it's the exact same side of the fence. Trans issues, teaching kids, it's the same as gay stuff. It's all
Lewis,
evil.
A 4-year-old, it's not all evil, but that 4-year-old doesn't need to know about any of this. They just don't.
It doesn't need to know about anything, really, and I don't think the government should be teaching anything about anything.
Well, well, they need to learn certain things.
No, they don't.
What, maths? English?
No.
How to read?
No, it should be up to the parents.
Oh, you're like William Blake. You just think you let kids get on with it.
Can I just dig my way out of this?
I think you're going to struggle, but go on.
Of course, it's incredibly bad. But we can't say that it's bad, because if you say that it's bad, it means you're saying that the people's lifestyles that are living today that are adults...
You're right, and you're right to be... There is a trepidation there, but you're wrong in the sense that those conversations can be had... It's like talking about accountancy. You don't need to know about that till you're 18 or 19. There's stuff you don't need to be clouded with.
I mean, the idea that if you don't teach kids about being a lesbian or gay at 4, that you are therefore against gay and lesbian people, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, it is, because those people who they're trans, they might say to themselves, I was 4 years old and I wish someone had taught me. But there's tons of things that 4-year-olds and older people, I remember that older children learn that are completely useless or confusing. I remember I had a jazz class when I was in high school, and I learned about Cannonball Adderley and these other jazz, Dizzy Gillespie. And they might as well have been talking about having my penis cut off. It was so...
I just don't see the connection, but I'm gonna, you know...
Can I dig my way out of it?
Come back. We'll give him his own show or something to explain all this stuff, because it would require it. Anyway, let's go to another question now. We've got one from Andy. Hi.
Yeah. Do mums no longer shop at Iceland? I'll go to Iceland.
Well, yeah. So they've changed the slogan, haven't they? Mum's gone to Iceland.
Yeah.
To what is it now? We've gone to Iceland. Andy, what do you think about it?
Well,
Mike?
Still mums about, so yeah.
There are still mums, and there are still mums who do go to... Is Iceland even still a thing? I thought it would stop.
Not for people like you, Andrew.
No. But, no, you know what? I was thinking of B-Jam.
Yes. But B-Jam became Iceland.
Oh, did it?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so on the pulse.
So you're in the same vein, except that happened in about '93.
Right.
So slightly behind the times. Of course, you know, I mean, it's just an extension of all the madness that we've seen. It's no big deal. I mean, the idea that we all think that only mums go to Iceland is so literal. They must all think we're really, really stupid.
Yeah.
And they all must, you know, are there actually mums out there thinking, well, I better go to Iceland because if I don't, no one's going to go?
Yeah. but, you know, I get the point insofar as they want to be a bit trendy, right? And they don't, you know, what if you're a young woman who's not a mum or a young guy and you want to get some frozen, you know, nuggets? But you'd be thinking, well, I can't go there because it says it's only for mums.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Is that what's going on?
I think you deserve that title of that guy if you walked into Iceland and said, am I allowed in here? Yeah. I'm not a mum.
Not a mum. You're a mum, aren't you?
I'm a mother. The answer is they weren't doing the right things. I mean, Iceland... I've been in this country 24 years or something, and Iceland hasn't really grown that much. Maybe so they needed to change their thing. The fact is that
they needed a new slogan. Yeah?
They needed a new slogan, and they hired this woman, this Josie, whatever her name is, the new spokesmodel person, and she's like a celebrity chaser, mom. Well, she's a mom. But
mums aren't allowed anymore.
No, but I was reading about this woman. She's so English. She's a single mother.
Which is weird because it's called Iceland. Maybe their slogan should be Iceland, not the country.
That's the kind of joke that I would...
Ultimately, though, we don't want Dad to go to Iceland, do we? Because he's just going to buy a lot of rubbish.
There is that.
Yeah, but Mum is going to buy rubbish, too, because that's all there
mums
is
are the
there.
best. Mums are the best. You know it, Lewis.
No.
OK, let's move on to a question from Nicholas. Where's Nicholas? Hi, Nicholas.
Hello. Is it racist to accuse somebody of playing the race card?
Well, Nicholas, I know you are half Italian, half Iranian.
Right.
So do you ever play the race card? Because you could.
No, but in order to be on GB News, I always identify as white and Italian.
OK. Well, it's an interesting story, though. So this tribunal said that, effectively, if you accuse someone of playing the race card, so say someone complains that they've been treated in a racist manner, and you say, oh, they're playing the race card, that is also a form of racism. But I'm not sure about that. I mean, because I play the gay card all the time with you,
and I play it with you.
Yeah, which is even more worrying.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and no, it's the same way where people are. Like, it's a Me Too question. It's like you have to believe all women, right? It's believe all women. And so if you question a woman and say, no, I don't believe that this has happened to you, then that's a bad thing.
If you came to me, Lewis, and said, look, I'm upset because I perceive that Paul Cox was being anti-Semitic and treating me in an anti-Semitic way, I would say I would need some evidence. I couldn't just go on your... Does that make me, therefore, complicit in anti-Semitism?
Yes, because yes, it would.
So you must believe you?
No, believe all Jews. Jews.
Right.
But don't believe black guys or women or whatever the rest of the people are. So because that's what this. That's what this story is. This story.
Well, it's believe all.
He's saying I felt oppressed.
Right.
Feelings matter more than facts. So we have to.
But the thing is, Paul, people do play the card sometimes.
They do.
I mean, I've met people who've played this card, whether it's being gay, being black, whatever. I've met loads of people who've done this.
Well, here's the thing, you see. Some people are racist and some people aren't. Not everybody is. And the way we are controlling language is biasing it in one direction.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think... I personally, if somebody come to me and made that accusation, I wouldn't accuse them of playing the race card. Because...
No.
As I don't believe you would...
I wouldn't do that. I would say, I would take the allegation seriously and I would look into it and find if there's any evidence for it. But I wouldn't automatically believe. I mean, it's like, who was the royal aide who was accused of racism, that 83-year-old woman?
Yes.
Who was simply asking where the woman was from. And she took it as racist, even though she was dressed in traditional African garb and had earrings in the shape of Africa. It's a legitimate question, I think, at that point.
And pre-2015, it wouldn't have been a big deal. We've created an environment now where we need shock. And we need victims, and we need oppressors, and everything has to be within that triangle. And if it's not, we don't really care for it because.
But this is an employment tribunal, so it's a bit more.
Well, and do you know what? It's such a fine line, isn't it? Because if someone's continually sitting there going, "Stop playing the race card," then
that's quite offensive. Because what if someone actually has been racist?
Exactly. So this is how you merge and you cloud all the time.
Right. So it's got to be context dependent, maybe. Anyway, let's get a quick question from Jas. Is it Jas?
Hi, Andrew.
Have I pronounced that right?
You have, yes.
Oh, great.
Should all trains have cuddle compartments?
So this is the German train operator.
Yes.
Jess, what do you think about this?
I wonder if it will just be used for just cuddle compartments.
Oh, that's a good point. OK, so I should explain a bit. So this is a German train company, Deutsche Bahn, I think it's called, right?
Yep.
And they basically have invented this idea of carriages, which they call cuddle carriages. And the windows frost over if you press a button. And you can cuddle. Jas is suggesting people might press that button for other reasons, yeah? Mainlining heroin, or whatever it might be. But illegal activity or sexual activity, perhaps.
Chance would be a fine thing. But it also can be used for taking a call, a work meeting, and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, but they're calling them cuddle compartments. So that sounds like a euphemism.
But it does, and it is kind of German, isn't it?
What?
The idea that...
Cuddling? No, they don't touch each other, do they?
Oh, some of the early movies I used to watch on BBC Radio Channel 4 late at night on a Friday.
Yeah. A lot of cuddling going on in those films.
And they were mainly German as well.
Ah, yes. Emmanuel gets a cuddle. I remember that one. Yeah.
Explicit briefs. Anyway. What was I trying to say?
I don't know.
So the idea of this compartment is what they're saying is it's a private compartment and we won't mind if you cuddle in it. They're not saying get in there with all your mates and
maybe it's just a continental thing, maybe...
Well, I misread it because I thought it was trans have a cuddle compartment.
No, trains.
Trains.
Yeah,
just one letter
You're
missing.
trans-obsessed, that's why.
That's what this channel is. It's all trans-obsessed.
Nobody
cares about trans.
We're trying to talk
You
about
are
trains.
obsessed with the trans
90% of the time we're doing stories about trains.
Obsessed.
And you
I don't
think,
think
trans.
And I think I've read about this thing. The Germans didn't call it a cuddle compartment.
Didn't they?
No, some newspaper.
No, they said it in German.
Something.
Don't be pedantic.
It was, well, I mean, they used to have
you
that...
You don't cuddle people, Lewis, because you are incapable of love.
Well...
Don't
sympathise,
really don't.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe if I got some love, I'd be more receptive.
Well, now you're begging the audience to love you, Lewis. That's not.
Yeah.
Would you use the frosted compartment, and if so, what for?
I think you can't have a business meeting in there. Once you go in there, people are going to be looking. It's not going to be done because people are already ridiculing it, and the Germans don't like ridicule.
They absolutely do not.
Yes,
that's true. OK, so let's move on now to Aisha. Where's Aisha? Hiya.
Hi, Andrew. I'd like to know, do you think it's fair that a supermarket worker could be sacked for not paying for their bag for life?
So, Aisha, I want to ask you what your view on that is.
I think that's pretty harsh.
You think it's harsh?
Yeah.
Well, it was a guy at Sainsbury's, and he'd been there for a long time, like 20-odd years, And what he did, when he was leaving work, he took the bag for life. He took some stuff, which he bought, and put them in a bag for life, but he didn't add the bag. You know, at the end, we have to put how many bags you put in. And he says it's because it was late at night and he was knackered. I can believe that. But was he a repeat offender?
Of course he was a repeat offender.
How many bags for life do you need? You just need one, don't you?
You know what? You just need to steal one once, and you know the guy's a criminal. He's a criminal. And the fact is why should we go into that place all the time? I have to pay for bags. I want to steal as many as I can.
It's only a bag, though, and he's been employed
it is only a bag, but he's going behind the scenes. Who knows what he's taking? And you know what? It's Sainsbury's. They don't advertise on this channel, so I hope they die.
Well, OK, that's a fair, I think a harsh but fair point.
Yes.
They were scared of the activists.
This is the tricky thing, isn't it? So by the letter of the law, that is stealing, even if it's 10 pence they're stealing, and therefore I guess it's very easy for someone like Sainsbury's to go, you're stealing, you're sacked. However, everyone's human, right?
Yeah.
Who wants to pay? No one wants to pay for a bag. The guy's worked there for 20 years. Let him have 10 bags.
Yeah.
I bet you haven't paid him that much in that time.
That's true.
So I would say there should be some leniency. And why does everyone need to know about it?
He wasn't like stealing a roast chicken or something.
I wish he should have. He should have done now, shouldn't he? He must be thinking now, I wish I'd gone straight to the TV aisle, scooped up all the TVs and put them in one of the bags for life.
I know you think it's a crime.
No, he is. The fact, excuse me, is that this is a message not to send to the employees, but to send to all the other people in the world that there's no special favours. You have to pay for the bag, no stealing.
Well, I'm going to stick with he might have been tired.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget.
Like, maybe he shouldn't have been working. He was tired. Sainsbury's did him a favour by putting him out of his job.
Yeah. OK, well, Lewis being really brutal. He does change. He's quite capricious, isn't he, Lewis?
He doesn't mean anything he says either, so we have no idea.
That as well. All right, let's go to a final question now from Luke. Where's Luke?
Good evening, Andrew. In the presence of the People's Gammon and the world's most attractive carnivore, was Joe Biden's uncle really eaten by cannibals?
Yeah, so this was the claim made by the president at a war memorial in Pennsylvania, where he began discussing the circumstances surrounding his uncle's death during World War II. And we do have a clip. Let's have a look.
And my uncle, they called him Ambrose, Brosey, they called him Bosey. My Uncle Bosey was a hell of an athlete, they tell me, when he was a kid. And he became an Army Air Corps before the Air Force came along. He flew those single-engine planes as reconnaissance over war zones. He got shot down in New Guinea, and they never found the body because there were a lot of cannibals.
Quick response, Lewis, because we don't have much time.
He's a racist.
OK. Don't know what he means by that. And Paul?
No, I mean, it's sad now, isn't it?
It is sad.
I mean, I'm looking at that thinking that's the leader of the free world.
Yeah.
And it's standing for he doesn't know he is, but he's standing for another election against.
I mean, look, it is sad, and I do feel bad when people mock him for his cognitive decline, etc. But on the other hand, the White House aren't admitting it.
No, it's
and
just
it's the leader of the free world, so you have to point it out.
It's not his fault, is it? It's not his fault. It's the civil servants around him. It's the people that prop him up for their own gain.
No, it is his own fault. He's basically on a vegan diet. He's got incredibly low cholesterol levels. That's why he's got this pallor of death on him. He can barely open his eyes. He needs meat.
Right. Lewis, it could just be that he's quite old.
No.
It's not like if you eat meat, you live forever.
Yes, they live a lot longer. If you Google cholesterol level, it's a curve like that. With as you get older, the more cholesterol you need.
Yeah, check out Lewis's favourite website. He's on the dark web or whatever it is. No, I've had enough. Anyway, next on Free Speech Nation, the Gay Men's Network have just unveiled their response to the cast review. Dennis Kavanagh is going to be here to give us a sneak preview. Please don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Children's stories like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland now come with a trigger warning at universities, alerting readers to possible themes of white supremacy.
Yes, these warnings are being applied to
colonial narratives, that's the claim, commonly found in adventure stories and famous novels from the Victorian era. Well, joining us now is the actor Charlie Lawson. And Charlie, these warnings have been applied to Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. What's this university getting at?
Well, look, first of all, this is nothing new. We hadn't heard about it for a while. Universities have been doing this over the last couple of years. I remember having a chat with one of your colleagues. But when Gabriella, the lovely Gabby, phoned me up today, I had to beg her to put me on after 9 o'clock because I found myself getting rather irate about the whole thing. But I will do my best to be very polite.
Yes, keep it clean.
Yes, look, which is quite difficult for me, as you'll appreciate, over this subject. Look, this is universities just jumping on the same trying to be relevant bandwagon. Is it any wonder that we look at the quality of graduates from university, and in my humble opinion, some of them are slightly disappointing. But I did phone a couple of people I knew who had sons and daughters at various leading universities, and they had been speaking this morning. And thank the Lord, they think it's a complete load of bloody nonsense, as I do. Give the C.S. Lewis Centre a ring in East Belfast, because that's where your man came from. And I think you'll find you'll get short shrift, because we're not all about that in East Belfast. We don't censor anything.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, the scandal that won't go away. Angela Rayner can run, but she can't hide. In My Take a 10, following his lurid confessions of drug use, the Duke of Sussex is praying that Joe Biden is re-elected, because if Donald Trump returns to the White House, Prince Harry could be returning to Britain. Plus, Queen Elizabeth II remembered on what would have been her 98th birthday. We're live at 9.
Feel bad about
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle.
I'm over my
So the Gay Men's Network official response to the Cass Review is now live. It is subtitled Towards a Vision of Post-Gender Gay Rights, and it describes the Cass Review as a devastating account of an unprecedented homophobic medical scandal in the NHS and private health sphere. And here to discuss it, I'm joined by Dennis Kavanagh, the lawyer and director of the Gay Men's Network. Welcome, Dennis. So let's start with your report from the Gay Men's Network. What is your response, in a nutshell, to the Cass Review?
Our response is basically this, that this is a sad day for the gay rights movement. Cass is a reality check, and it's shown us that for decades now, homosexuality has in effect been medicalised at the NHS. You and I have spoken before about the fact that 80 to 90% of the kids at the Tavistock were same-sex attracted.
Which has been confirmed by the Cass Review.
Precisely that. So we say this. We say this is a shocking indictment of gay politics and of the gay rights movement generally, particularly in view of the fact that the very people who should have been protecting gay youth, principally Stonewall, didn't just abandon their post, they joined the opposition forces when they should have been standing up for these kids.
And what do you think their response will be now? I know Stonewall put out a kind of unclear statement, sort of saying we accept the findings of the Cass Review, but it wasn't that clear, was it?
They've had two statements. They put out a tweet saying that they accepted the Cass Review. Their own supporters then turned on them fairly viciously to express their displeasure with it. They've now released a longer statement in which they're scrabbling around in the Cass review for crumbs of hope, saying, well, it's not a blanket ban on puberty blockers because there's still a possibility of a clinical trial, for example. But Stonewall need to get real on this. This is over now. Dr. Cass has called time on this homophobic medical scandal. The sitting Secretary of State, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health have accepted Cass. It's time for Stonewall to do the same, actually show some leadership and some concern for gay youth. I would make this point, if I may, Andrew. That statement from Stonewall, it didn't have the word gay or lesbian in it once. And that's a powerful indication there.
OK, well, it might be worth just reading out what Stonewall said. They said, Dr. Cass has not called for adolescents to have their right to their identity or autonomy removed, nor did Dr. Cass recommend a blanket ban on social transitioning for children of any age. Most significantly, Dr. Cass did not support unilateral outing of trans young people by schools. There are clear gaps between recommendations and practical policy, and we're already hearing early reports of Dr. Cass's analysis of and recommendations about social transitioning being used to challenge trans people's rights to identity. But it's interesting, as you say, Dennis, they don't mention the key issue here, which is their failure to stand up for gay and lesbian youth.
Yeah, and what a gloss on the Cass report that is. If you look at what the Cass report actually says about social transitioning, it says where this occurs, there should be reference to a clinician almost immediately because it's not a neutral act. You won't find that in the Stonewall response because Stonewall don't seem to care about concretising cross-sex ideation predominantly among a homosexual young population.
But they have bought into this idea that everyone is born with a gender identity and that might be misaligned to the body. So this is a belief system that is now so embedded in Stonewall. Isn't it time that Stonewall was just no longer taken seriously?
I entirely agree. 2015, Stonewall added the T to the LGB under the leadership of Ruth Hunt, who promised everyone she wasn't going to do that, but performed a volte-face, which is why she's now facing, in the wake of this medical scandal, she's now facing a petition started by the author Simon Edge, which is coming up on, I think, 16,000-odd signatures, a petition to remove her from the House of Lords.
I know you say that it's time's up now, thanks to Cass, but isn't it going to be tough? And the reason I say that is there are still so many prominent gay and lesbian celebrities and groups and politicians who are standing up for Stonewall, who are standing up for the idea that kids may have a misaligned soul and body. And actually, given the prominence of those people, maybe voices like yours are the minority here.
Well, that may or may not be the case, but what matters here is not the weight of numbers. What matters here is who is right about safeguarding these children. And if I'm one voice in 100, I don't care if I'm right. I do think Stonewall are losing purchase in the public sphere, though. I do think politicians are beginning to realise that something has gone very, very seriously wrong here. It is heartening to see a cross-party consensus of serious politicians from the larger parties embracing Cass and saying that a post-Cass NHS should effectively entirely rid itself of this poisonous ideology.
And will it be taken up by the politicians? I mean, I know Alicia Kearns was adding an amendment to the criminal justice bill to try and ban what she calls trans conversion therapy, but actually Cass specifically refers to this, saying that actually this should not be mistaken, this should not be confused in the way that she's doing. She doesn't name Alicia Kearns, but she says that it is a common confusion.
Yeah, and we've drawn this to Alicia Kearns' attention. We actually produced a briefing note at Gay Men's Network on that amendment to the criminal justice bill. We've drawn Dr. Cass's comments to her attention. So far, we've heard absolutely nothing. Ms Kearns seems to think it's fine to speak over and speak for gay men when gay men are telling her, look, there's a problem with this piece of legislation and it has the capacity to harm gay boys.
What I don't understand is so many of these people, they all agree that Section 28 was this terrible thing and the idea of the so-called promotion of homosexuality in schools, it should never have happened. And here they are, presiding over something which is arguably even worse.
Yeah, I agree. It is an absurd situation and it is Orwellian, frankly, for them to be introducing such homophobic legislation and then telling us that it's a gay conversion ban. As we've discussed before, that is precisely the opposite of what it is. What it is state-sanctioned conversion by gender and criminal penalties for doctors that don't go along with it. We call upon Alicia Kearns to withdraw this silly homophobic amendment and we call on the Scottish Government to scrap their proposed piece of legislation, which is even worse than the Kearns Amendment.
Is it time to divide LGBT?
Yes. Our interests have been demonstrated now to be entirely contrary to each other. And look, we are different protected characteristics, right? Those who have the gender reassignment characteristic under the Equality Act, good luck to them. And they, of course, should have rights in law. No one's opposed to that. But this forced teaming, this marriage cannot work, and it's become an abusive relationship.
I don't understand, because I saw Jeremy Corbyn speak this week saying that there is no LGB without the T. How can it be the case that gay people who want to organise in their own interests should be connected automatically to the belief in a gender identity, which is a completely separate thing to sexual orientation? Has he not even talked to people about this or attempted to understand?
Well, it's just another straight man telling us how to organise. How dare he? How dare he stand up and say, you gays, you can't organise unless you force team with a bunch of other people that I, a straight man, have chosen for you. Jeremy Corbyn has no right to say that to us. He doesn't understand this issue. He doesn't understand that our interests are sometimes contradictory, as is demonstrated by this global homophobic medical scandal.
Now, I wanted to ask you about an open letter that has been put together by James Esses, who's a campaigner. And this is a letter which has a number of signatories, including yourself, and I should say, for complete transparency, including myself. And this is calling on the government to have a full investigation into the impact of gender identity ideology in all aspects of public life. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. I can tell you, I'm one of the 3 directors of Gay Men's Network. All 3 of us have signed this, and we support James's efforts here. We also call for a public inquiry in our consultation response. We invite ministers to consider their powers under Section 1 of the 2005 Inquiries Act, which is established to deal with areas of public concern. Well, what more could be of public concern than a medical scandal where the harm is disproportionately visited on defenceless children? If that's not a matter of public concern, I don't know what is. We need to get gender ideology out of the public sphere. We've got an NHS insulting women by calling them uterus havers. We've got the BBC teaching kids there's 100 genders. We've got the CPS introducing or proposing 2-tier prosecution standards in the case of rape by, sex by deception, which we've discussed in the past. We got Kemi Badenoch saying across the floor of the Commons, I was told by my officials, her civil servants, that I shouldn't meet with Keira Bell. And we know that that meeting had a fundamental effect on that minister.
That's a detransitioner, Keira
That's
Bell.
right. Keira Bell, who heroically and courageously brought the case of Bell and Tavistock a judicial review. So we support James's call for there to be a public inquiry. This ideology has run riot. None of us voted for it. None of us got a say in this, and yet it seems to have infested all areas of public life. We're sick of it because, as we can see with Cass, this is not an academic debate, right? It's not the Judith Butlers and the gendercrats and you know, the Stonewall CEOs at their black tie dinners who pay the price for this. Who pays the price? Vulnerable kids, autistic kids, kids that are looked after. This is not OK. We need to deal with this.
And you make the point about it not being democratic. It is in both parties. You know, this is the problem. We can't vote this out. There's no way. So is it likely that a public consultation or investigation will happen?
Well, we shall see. We're making the case for it. That's all we can do for the time being. James has amassed a very impressive list of signatories from all sides of the House. We've got to get real about this. This is a medical scandal without equal. This was gay conversion 2.0 at the Tavistock. Lives have been ruined by this. Evidence from the Mayo Clinic in America just last week suggests that boys given puberty blockers have testicular atrophy, so the tissue in the testicles is degrading, and an increased cancer risk. That's where gender has led us to. There's going to be, you know, heaven forbid, but it does seem likely that we're going to end up with some boy walking around now, probably in America, is going to end up with cancer in his testicles because of these clowns and what they unleashed on defenceless children.
Finally, Dennis, could you tell us where we can read your full response to the Cass review?
Sure. The full response is available at www.gaymensnetwork.com under Letters and Resources.
Dennis Kavanagh, thanks ever so much for joining me. And next up on Free Speech Nation, Dr. Carrie Mendoza will join us from the United States to tell us what the response has been to the Cass review over the pond. Don't go anywhere.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So after a drier end to the weekend for many of us today, it looks like change is on the way. An area of low pressure situated out to the north of the UK brings some weak frontal systems that will slowly sink their way southwards, particularly into the start of the new working week, and that area of high pressure we've seen pushes away towards the northwest. So a cloudy end to the day for much of eastern Scotland and northern England as that rain continues to sink its way southwards overnight, so quite a cloudy picture quite across the board into the early hours of Monday morning. But southeastern parts of England still holding on to some clearer skies, and we could even see some frost here, although not quite as cold under all that cloud and rain, and particularly across parts of Scotland holding up into the high single figures. So a cloudier start for many of us on Monday, particularly compared to what we saw over the weekend, and this rain continues to spread its way southwards through Monday daytime, not turning particularly heavy, but definitely a grey and damp day compared to the recent couple of days. Northern parts of Scotland probably seeing the best of the sunshine through the afternoon. I'm feeling warm here with highs of 14 or 15 degrees, but definitely feeling much chillier across much of England and Wales under all that cloud and rain. That cloud and rain does eventually clear its way towards the southeast to start on Tuesday, so there will be some brighter spells, particularly for the northern half of the UK. Plenty of sunshine around through the morning. 1 or 2 showers bubbling up through the afternoon, particularly along some North Sea coastal regions, and staying quite cloudy in the southeast through the afternoon. Further showers on their way through Wednesday and Thursday, but hints of low pressure returning as we head towards the second half of the week.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. The Cass review has obviously had a huge impact over here, topping news bulletins and leading to demands for public inquiries, as you just heard from Dennis Kavanagh. But has it had any impact over in the United States, where there have been also controversies over gender identity issues? Well, here to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by physician Dr. Carrie Mendoza, Director of GenSpect USA. Dr. Mendoza, thanks so much for coming on to the show. I just want to ask whether Americans have received the Cass review in the way that the British have, because I have been informed that the American media hasn't really made much of it.
Andrew, thank you so much for having me. I wish we had better news over here for you, but it really has been ignored to a great degree over here in the States.
And why do you think that is? I mean, is this evidence of the ideological capture of the various institutions in America, or is it that it's just a busy news day?
I think it really is evidence of the ideologic capture. You know, the current administration and policymakers really are on a very strong tact of writing gender ideology into civil rights legislation, as well as the general foundations of how medicine is practiced here.
And we saw the same, didn't we, with the WPATH files, which we covered extensively on this show, that actually these bodies just aren't interested in admitting the problem. One of the aspects of the Cass review was that 6 out of the 7 of the adult gender clinics did not share their data. So what can we do to bring the medical profession back in line with ethical standards?
Yeah, I think the issue of the data sharing is really such a big one. And I think it's super important to focus on that, especially with what's going on in the United States, as we've really made a big business of making electronic health records available and widely part of the way medicine is practiced. And so I think when you look and see the response to a lot of the folks who are trying to make sure that this care is continuing to be available, they're really starting to focus on data privacy and protection, as they call it, for the LGBTQ community, saying that they shouldn't have to share their data. So I think politically and in terms of policymakers, especially over here in our country where the software designers are really the lead in the world, we need to really look at the data sharing aspect and how important it is to protect data, but make sure that it is also available for high quality research.
But if they are serious about the best interests of these individuals who are undergoing gender medicine, surely it would be in their interest to keep a track of what happened later in life after this treatment. What can their justification possibly be for withholding data when it comes to this?
Well, I really think that clearly they're not wanting the long-term outcomes to be revealed, as well as things related to medication adverse effects, cancer risk long-term. So I think there's really this focus ideologically on sort of short-term interests versus the long-term side effect. And so I think if you're in a position where you don't want to share the data, you just don't want to know.
But isn't that against the Hippocratic Oath? Isn't that against the whole principle of first do no harm?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. This should not be politicized. This should really be about what is the best for every single patient. If you're a trans-identified patient, we need an environment where this is not politicized. We need people who are looking out for your best interests in terms of long-term outcomes, so you don't get cancer, so you don't get a host of terrible side effects that you might not be thinking right now because you're thinking more about the short-term issues.
I think the Cass review has revealed objectively that the evidence base for the use of puberty blockers is weak. Will this make any difference whatsoever to current practice in America, or indeed practice that is recommended by the Biden administration?
It really doesn't seem to be, unfortunately. There seems to be a focus more on short-term issues of, will this make you happy, versus is there evidence for a good practice in medicine. And that's where I think that the big conflict is related to. People are really looking at the question, is this going to make me happy? And that is where a lot of the policymakers are focusing, as well as just bodily autonomy. It's very libertarian here in the sense that if a patient wants to do something in our country, our systems are set up to say, hey, that should be okay for them to do it.
But even with children, even when it comes to children?
I mean, that's where the big debate is going. Of course, it shouldn't be. There's no evidence that is safe at all, or that, as Cass was saying, they can diagnose, who is that trans-identified person now that is going to be unhappy later. Let's try and prevent that. So in our country, I think, it may end up going along the lines of abortion politics, where the argument is around bodily autonomy. If someone wants to do that, they should be able to. And so I think that's what the big debate is in our country.
Very interesting. Well, Dr. Carrie Mendoza, thank you ever so much for joining me. Next on Free Speech Nation, Liz Truss promotes her new book, a moment of embarrassment for the Incredible Hulk, and an elephant gallops through the streets of Montana. It's almost time for social sensations. Don't go anywhere.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Mark White was saying there, Sue, that he thinks it's getting worse, and you were nodding along to that. You've seen this over decades. Situation is sprawling along the coast, more people, and the danger is ramping up.
Definitely, because the numbers and the money it's run like a military operation. I mean, I've been told that by the National Crime Agency, and I don't need to be told it by them to know it. It is meticulous because there's so much money involved. So they're marshalling migrants here, the gangs, they're controlling the gangs, and there will be a kingpin. You know, in some city far away in Erbil, or even in Paris, or in Brussels, who never goes anywhere near the beaches. It's like a Ponzi scheme, really.
Yeah. With that in mind, there's such vested interest, such money, such demand, a never-ending string of demand of people who want to come here.
People are already on their way, remember?
Yeah.
If we stop them now, they're already leaving. There's people leaving the Sudan now are going to reach the only place they want to get to, the French beaches, to get to the UK. They'll arrive in 2.5 years' time.
And so,
you see, they're on their way.
If it's that organised, that lucrative, that desirable, how on earth do we ever break that chain?
It sounds incredibly harsh, but I think if the EU change politically in the June elections, which I think it probably will, I think they will put up, as the Greeks have done, holding camps all over Europe, the coasts of Europe, where people are assessed, just to see who is coming in, which would be a plus, as the Greeks have done, because we have no idea who is coming in.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. It's that time of the show, Social Sensations. It's when we look at what's been going viral on social media. So first up, here's a video of our former Prime Minister Liz Truss attempting to promote her new book in America. Let's have a look.
Great to see you. Your thoughts...
Great to see you. And here's my new book. I'll just get it up. Sorry, I'll get it up front. There we are.
I mean, God love her. Look, well, it's difficult to work out where the camera is and which way you should hold it.
It took her longer to turn the book around than it did for her to be Prime Minister, didn't it? The way we're all Liz Truss fans now, are we? You do feel for her because she can never have quite enough of a run to be credible.
I know. I mean, and look, that's an easily mockable thing, but I think it's also an easily done thing. I can imagine doing exactly the same thing.
It's not a sensation, I guess.
No, it's not. No, it's not a sensation, is it? How do you feel about Liz Truss?
I feel about her using my hands.
What do you mean? Lewis, what does that mean?
Mainly
that was hard.
Laughing.
No. I
would like to apologise to Liz Truss.
You know what? I feel sorry for her because I mean she was given the keys to the kingdom and she hasn't even gotten into the driveway. But,
you know, to be fair, she was Prime Minister, and that's no mean feat.
But she wasn't. But even by British standards, which is you're kind of appointed by your fellow MPs and then you run, and you're not elected. I mean, the political system here is so deformed.
Well, OK, let's get another one now. This is a video where a children's birthday party takes a turn for the worse.
Here, you want me to do this one? Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is terrifying. Are the kids really upset about that? Or...
They didn't look too happy to me. Imagine if that was your birthday
They were
present.
running around screaming.
I mean, first of all, it's a big green man.
Yes.
Who's coming in angry. And then he falls over with his legs under his body and his back to the small girl. I don't know what's going on.
Were they upset and screaming because they were worried about him? Or were they terrified of him because he's a big green man?
Probably because he's a big green man. That would have been the first impression. I don't think they'd have been worried for his safety.
You know, then they always have clowns at children's parties, and the clowns are scary to children, aren't they?
Of course they're scary. But then again, I've had kids, and some of them, they deserve to be scared occasionally.
OK.
They're not all innocent children.
Well, finally, we've got this one. This is residents in Butte, Montana, and they had quite a shock this week when driving down the street. Let's have a look at what they saw.
Elephant walking down the road. Oh my god. Oh my god.
So are elephants native to Montana?
Well, actually, they are native. There's big woolly mammoths, and they are elephants.
Aren't they
just hairy.
extinct, Lewis?
The ones that are very hairy. It just shows the...
I'm never asking you another question.
The feminization of elephants.
The feminization of elephants.
The hairless ones are extinct.
Paul, are they native to Montana?
They're definitely not native to Montana, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
I asked Lewis about this earlier, and he started saying, I've got this impression, he said, I can do an elephant. He started pulling the pockets out of his trousers.
Oh, goodness. Oh, please. No. OK, let's definitely move on now. This is where we're going to talk about your unfiltered dilemmas. Thank you for emailing in with all of your problems, as usual. Let's get a dilemma from David. David says, the person I hold most dear and look to above all others in this foul and despicable world has just said, me and my panel, instead of my panel and I. How can I ever forgive or overlook the shocking use of the English language? Hey, you know what, David? This is a difficult job, especially when you've got a cold and you're not well and you have to pretend to be all happy. And actually, I'm just this sort of black void of darkness. Let's get another dilemma now from Holly. Holly says, I was on the train the other day when two young girls were chatting about the woes of modern dating. I was obviously eavesdropping and thought I could help, so I went up to them and offered some love life advice. They seemed rather grateful, but my husband ridiculed me for being intrusive. Did I overstep the mark? Well, Lewis, you know about overstepping the mark.
Yeah.
Would this count?
Well, I know when I go talk to young women that they say that to me.
Not just women?
Yeah.
No.
But, yeah, you got to... You know, I see people like who are fat like Paul, and I want to help him. And you can't help anybody nowadays. People are beyond help. That's why I talk to the general... You can't talk to people specifically.
People who are fat like Paul. You've got to have a right to reply to that.
No, well, Lewis is, you know...
What?
Horrible.
Horrible. Absolutely horrible.
But I do love him. He's the only man I've ever truly loved, Andrew. So I can't say a bad word against him.
Very quickly, overstepping the mark, yes or no? What do you think?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, why would you? Would you walk down a train carriage, eavesdrop on a conversation, offer advice?
I think we need more boundaries in society, particularly with you, Lewis. And I think you need to develop more boundaries for your own sake.
Yeah, I agree.
That's been the moral of this episode. Thanks for joining us for Free Speech Nation. This was the week when Liz Truss had trouble plugging her new book. Someone lost a job over some bags for life. And, of course, the Cats Review changed the world of gender medicine forever, fingers crossed. Thank you to my panel, Paul Cox and Lewis Schaefer, to all of my brilliant guests this evening. And if you want to join us live in the studio, you can be part of our wonderful audience. Dead easy. Just go to www.sroaudiences.com. That's right there on the screen. Come along, apply, and we've got wine, we've got food. It's a lot of fun. Stay tuned, by the way, because Mark Dolan's coming up next. And don't forget that Headliners is on every night at 11 o'clock. That is the late-night paper preview show where comedians talk you through the next day's top news stories. Thanks so much for watching Free Speech Nation. I'll see you next week.
Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So after a drier end to the weekend for many of us today, it looks like change is on the way. An area of low pressure situated out to the north of the UK brings some weak frontal systems that will slowly sink their way southwards, particularly into the start of the new working week. And that area of high pressure we've seen pushes away towards the northwest. So a cloudy end to the day for much of eastern Scotland and northern England as that rain continues to sink its way southwards overnight. So quite a cloudy picture quite across the board into the early hours of Monday morning. But southeastern parts of England still holding on to some clearer skies, and we could even see some frost here, although not quite as cold under all that cloud and rain, and particularly across parts of Scotland, holding up into the high single figures. So a cloudier start for many of us on Monday, particularly compared to what we saw over the weekend, and this rain continues to spread its way southwards through Monday daytime, not turning particularly heavy, but definitely a grey and damp day compared to the recent couple of days. Northern parts of Scotland probably seeing the best of the sunshine through the afternoon. I'm feeling warm here with highs of 14 or 15 degrees, but definitely feeling much chillier across much of England and Wales under all that cloud and rain. That cloud and rain does eventually clear its way towards the southeast to start on Tuesday, so there will be some brighter spells, particularly for the northern half of the UK. Plenty of sunshine around through the morning. 1 or 2 showers bubbling up through the afternoon, particularly along some North Sea coastal regions, and staying quite cloudy in the southeast through the afternoon. Further showers on their way through Wednesday and Thursday, but hints of low pressure returning as we head towards the second half of the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I hope you're well. Busy one tonight. It's 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. The scandal that won't go away. Angela Rayner can run, but she can't hide. I'll be explaining why this story is far more important than the Labour Party would have you believe. Another crisis for Rishi Sunak as disgraced Tory MP Mark Menzies resigns.